Customer states, hit a huge acorn on the way back from my buddy's lake house. Can you just check her out underneath and make sure she's all good? The owner of this car had apparently been telling himself that the clunking was probably just some gravel in the wheels or maybe just a tiny bit of play in the ball joint. The mechanic found the lower control arm looking like this. The owner of this car had it in for some suspension work at a different shop the week before, but said that he's had a strange badonka-donka sound ever since. Customer states, my buddy rebuilt the whole drivetrain for me and sorted out the clutch for a 12-pack and a bottle of Jack. But I'm not sure if he drank it before or after working on the car, because I have a problem getting it in gear now. The mechanic working on this engine probably knew what he was going to find before he even got the head off. When he finally did, he found one of the pistons had gone on a permanent vacation to Scrappyland. The mechanic who pulled these wheels found brake rotors that had apparently been on a very long personal journey. One of them had even started coming apart mid-trip. The owner of this truck had come in saying that the brakes were making a bit of a crunching sound, and when the mechanic pulled the wheel, he found that someone had gotten pretty creative with the brake pads. And the owner of this car was apparently trying to go back to 1955 to tell his father that the future was going to be a crazy place, and that he should buy as much gold and land as he can, because his children and grandchildren will thank him. Customer states, car's been feeling a little sluggish lately, even though I added some coolant last week. Shouldn't that typically help? The owner of this car had his little brother, who's an apprentice at a local garage, tune his engine a little by installing some high-performance ignition coils, and this is the result. And this engine block had developed an opening that the manufacturer definitely had not included in the original design. The mechanic was kind enough to fix it the best way he could. And this car came in because the owner said the engine had started to run rough after having the timing belt replaced at a local shop. The mechanic pulled the cover and found the belt so loose he could move it freely with one finger. And this customer rolled in saying that he had borrowed his car to his wife for the very last time. The owner of this car had been coming in for regular service for years and was a lovely customer. The mechanic opened the trunk, lifted the floor panel to check the spare, and found that a small hardware store had moved in at some point. Customer states, my car has developed some character lately. Kind of vibrates a little when I sit at a red light, but I think it's just the personality of the engine. The owner of this car had installed some engine mounts at another shop, but had to come in because he said his hood gets a bulge when accelerating. The owner of this Volvo had apparently been topping up the coolant by himself for the past couple of years, and was pretty confident he had been using the right stuff. Customer states, got my window regulator fixed at a shop down the road last week. Works great now. Rolls right up, just maybe not exactly where it's supposed to. This mechanic had a car in for a standard oil change when he found the undercarriage looking like this. And this car came in because the owner wanted their cloth seats converted into leather but forgot to mention anything about half their living room being in their car. And this differential had definitely seen some better days. This mechanic drained the differential on this one and stuck his finger in to stir it around and found something that looked less like gear oil and more like salted caramel fondue. The owner of this car came in saying the engine had gotten a little louder lately, but figured it was just the cold weather doing its thing. This customer came in saying that she had hit a pothole that looked smaller than it was while on her way to work. This car rolled in because the owner had a really strange noise coming from the front at all speeds, even though he had tried taking care of it all by himself using some industrial grade lube. Customer states, engine's been a little rattly lately, but I think it just needs some fresh oil and maybe a tune-up. Customer states, swapped in a new radiator last weekend. Runs great, but it rattles a little at idle. Is that normal? The owner of this car came in saying the brakes had been feeling a little spongy lately, and the mechanic found out pretty quickly just how hard that wheel had been working at keeping things together. Customer states, the interior plastic on my Chevy Trax has developed a kind of sticky glossy texture. Is that a normal thing that happens as it gets older? Customer states, car keeps overheating even after I tried fixing it with some stop leak. Customer states, I've had a clunking sound from the front for about 8 months and figured it would stop on its own eventually, but it's just getting worse and worse. The owner of this Acura came in because it wouldn't start. Apparently, he had noticed a small coolant leak under the hood and patched it up with an old rag and some tie wraps, but it had just ended up creating an even bigger issue. And this is how you find out that whoever did the wiring on this one had gotten a little too creative with the cable placement. The owner of this car had brought it in saying it had started leaking a little bit of oil and that it had gotten a bit louder lately. The mechanic pulled the engine and found something that explained both of those things pretty well. And the owner of this car couldn't have come in any sooner to have the timing belt replaced. The owner of this car was apparently convinced that if a warning light hasn't come on, nothing can possibly be wrong, so he just wanted the oil and filter change. The mechanic got underneath the car and found the undercarriage looking like this. This drivetrain was spinning, technically. It was just doing it with a little extra spice added to it. The owner of this car had apparently spent a good chunk of his weekend upgrading the engine for more power. The mechanic opened the hood and found 2 air filters, one doing its job and one for moral support. Customer came in complaining about the car feeling really shaky when driving over 80 miles an hour. The mechanic who pulled this F-250 into the bay found a long list of issues. Wheels a bit too wide for the truck, wiring that looked like it had been done during a power outage, and a steering wheel that had a free roam setting turned on by default. And when the customer uses apple juice as washer fluid, you know the warning lights in the dash have been on for a little longer than the customer is willing to admit. This customer came in saying the car had been running a little warmer than usual lately, but that it was probably nothing. Customer states, squeaky sounds coming from brakes. This truck rolled in because it sometimes wouldn't start, especially after the car wash. The mechanic spent a good 10 minutes checking the battery, the fuel system, and just about everything else under the hood before he looked down at the floor. Customer states, just needs a new stereo. Guy I know started the job but had to leave early. Can you have it done by the afternoon? This car had barely made it into the parking lot before the ground underneath it started looking like a small lake. Customer states, cab smells like pork chops, but only in the winter. Please advise. Customer states, hit a huge swan garden sculpture while backing out of the driveway really fast because I was late for work. Customer states, had my cousin do a little electrical work last week and everything sort of works, but the gauges just get a little excited sometimes. The owner of this Chevrolet Silverado HD had been on his way home from the dealership after having some engine work done when the car started running rough. The mechanic opened the hood and found a couple of parts that were not exactly where they were supposed to be. The owner of this truck had it in because they get a clunking sound anytime they slam the brakes and couldn't figure out what it was. And this customer came in for a routine tire rotation when the mechanic flipped the wheel around and found a crack running through the inner barrel that had apparently been there for quite a while. Customer states, truck's been making a little knock when braking, but my neighbor serviced it last fall and did a really thorough job on it, even got me some sportier calipers. The owner of this Tesla had apparently been telling everyone he drives an electric race car. This car came in with a pretty serious fluid leak that the mechanic traced pretty quickly once he noticed what the front of the car looked like. Customer states, "My buddy rebuilt the engine for me last summer. It ran great for about 2 months and then it got a little loud." Customer states, "Brakes feel like a memory foam pillow." Customer states, "Found these cool looking lug nuts on Temu and they had free shipping, so I went for a whole set. But they're darn hard to get off. Please advise." This truck had apparently been parked outside long enough to start its own pinecone collection. Customer states, "I filled her up 3 days ago and she's still showing full, but I think the gauge must be broken." And this customer came in saying, "Parked on the grass last night and now the car won't move. Could be a flat maybe?" The owner of this car came in convinced the tire just had a slow leak and that a plug would sort it out. The tire at this point was not attached to any rim at all and was somehow still leaking. And this car had started to overheat after a recent visit to another shop where they did some work on the cooling system. This car had apparently been sitting in a barn for 6 months and came in because the owner had a grinding noise when turning. The owner of this car had been on his way to a fishing trip with some friends when the car started making a gurgling sound. The mechanic pulled the exhaust off and a small river came pouring out. This car came in with some starting issues and a pretty suspicious electrical smell after the owner's neighbor had apparently done some wiring repairs on it a few weeks prior. This mechanic spun this old wheel bearing on the floor, and it sang him quite the little song. The owner of this truck came in saying that his AC has started to rattle a lot at all speeds because his 6-year-old son's favorite thing to do on longer drives is pretending that the air vent is a vending machine. The customer came in saying the seat heater had stopped working and that it would probably be a quick fix. The mechanic pulled the back panel off the seat and found what appeared to be the inside of a commercial aircraft. Customer states, "My AC stopped working and the battery light came on. Might be the compressor and the battery cables. The belt should be fine. I changed it myself last month." The owner of this Mercedes apparently had a little disagreement with the curb at some point, and from the looks of things, the curb won. The owner of this car rolled in saying that he always ends up in the town next doors instead of the town he needs to be in and wanted to know why. This guy had installed a custom sport exhaust on his Volkswagen by himself, but now had a pretty bad fuel leak. This car rolled in after the customer's best friend and neighbor had apparently done some suspension work on it a few weeks prior, and the mechanic got underneath to find the shock absorbers looking like this. Customer states, "Been hearing a little strange sound for about 4 days now, but she still drives fine and I figured it was probably just some loose gravel in the wheel." A clunking sound from the front for a while, and apparently the owner's uncle had taken a swing at fixing it himself with some fresh metal and a welder. The mechanic found the whole hub being held up by raw optimism. Customer states, "Installed my own car anti-theft system." The owner of this car came in absolutely convinced there was a major fault with the rear center console, saying it had been stuck in the wrong position for weeks and that the previous shop had no idea how to fix it. The owner of this car had apparently lost his gas cap somewhere along the way and had to come up with a solution that was pretty creative but not very effective. Sparky Sparky. Customer states, "Did an oil change at a quick lube shop, but car's been way too excited ever since." And this is exactly what happens when a car has been in one too many minor incidents that the owner forgot to mention when he dropped it off. And this is exactly how you know the previous owner took great care of it. The owner of this car came in saying the hood had started rattling a little at highway speeds. Turns out the hood latch had snapped clean off its mount and the hood had been held shut by wishful thinking for quite some time. And sometimes the floor jack reminds you that car work can have some pretty serious consequences. The mechanic who opened the hood on this one found a nitrous oxide kit that someone had installed all by themselves with about as much hose as a garden center. And this customer came in saying his car had been driving a little rougher than usual lately, but that he wasn't too worried because his father-in-law had taken a look underneath just a few months back and said everything was solid. Customer came in saying that they have a strange rattling sound anytime they play a song with lots of bass. Customer came in saying, my rear tires keep wearing out on one side faster than the other. Is that a tire brand thing? Fast and Furious! The owner of this car had been chasing an alternator problem for weeks and had apparently called in a favor from a neighbor who's apparently pretty good with electronics. The mechanic got to the battery, checked the voltage, and then touched the alternator and watched the numbers go absolutely all over the place. Customer states, yeah, she smokes a little on cold starts, but once she warms up, she's totally fine. This car came in with a check engine light, and the mechanic found it had two air filters installed on top of each other, a sketchy wiring job on the other side of the engine bay, and a turquoise rubber bulb attached to a hose near the oil cap. And this is exactly why you don't over-tighten the oil cap after every oil change. The owner of this Volkswagen came in saying the steering had started feeling a little loose. I wonder why. Customer states, my heater stopped blowing and there's a faint rattle somewhere in the dash. I think maybe a wire came loose or something. Can you have a look? Seems like a perfectly acceptable amount of play. And this is exactly what happens when you trust your nephew who says he knows everything about cars and can help to fix that coolant leak for you for cheap, but accidentally ends up pouring things into the wrong hole. This car rolled in for a basic service and the owner mentioned that he's pretty sure he changes the oil more often than most people he knows. And this mechanic was working on this GDI engine and pulled the oil cap off to have a look and found smoke coming straight out the fill hole and an engine knock so deep you could feel it in your teeth. Customer states, need coolant topped up. Also, I know the brake light is on, but it's been on for 2 years and the car still drives and stops fine. This timing belt had apparently decided it was done holding things together and had started working on its exit strategy one thread at a time. And sometimes, you just gotta have a little faith in the Lord and Jesus that you have enough gas in the tank that you'll make it home in one piece. This customer came in saying they had a bit of a rough drive home after hitting what they described as a pretty small pothole on the freeway. The mechanic got underneath it and found the tire looking like this. The mechanic pulled the dipstick on this Infiniti and found it covered in something that looked a lot more like a vanilla milkshake latte than engine oil. And this mechanic had decided he was done having slippery and dirty shoes at work and built this, using an old jigsaw and a couple brushes. The mechanic who pulled the front wheel on this Mercedes truck found a wiring situation underneath that looked less like automotive repair and more like modern art. Turns out, a buddy of the owner had done some electrical work at some point and the cables had been slowly melting ever since. This truck had apparently been driven by someone who believed tires were a one-time purchase. And this is exactly why you don't let your nephew rebuild a truck engine in the front yard after watching a 3-part YouTube series on it over the weekend. The lifters came out looking like they'd been installed by someone who was maybe a little too confident going in. The mechanic working on this one spun the wheel and found a tire that had apparently been running on pure optimism for quite some time. And the owner of this car came in saying that the brakes make a little noise here and there, but that she stops fine and thinks it's probably just some surface rust from the rain. Customer states, just need a quick interior clean before I sell it. She's in pretty good shape overall, just needs a little freshen up. And this customer rolled in saying that he hit what looked like a giant beehive on the freeway and that he's had a bunch of disco lights in the dashboard ever since. Customer states, car wouldn't start this morning, so my older brother came over and put some new coils in. She fires up now but runs a little uneven. Can you take a quick look at it? And this engine came in after the timing chain had apparently started chewing on itself, with bits of plastic shredded all over the chain and a gasket that had long since given up. And the owner of this Tesla had figured out how to never worry about EV range ever again. It's actually quite simple, you just need a trailer hitch. The owner of this car rolled in saying that the brakes make a sound but they work fine and that he just needs to check the rear drums because his father-in-law said they might need new shoes. And this customer came in saying both front wheels were in great shape and just needed new tires mounted. The mechanic gave one of them a little tap and well, one of them was definitely not in great shape. The owner of this motorcycle had heard a loud snap and then the engine just stopped. The mechanic opened it up, pulled out the drive shaft with one hand and found it had snapped off clean. And this car rolled in for a routine inspection when the mechanic grabbed the rotor and found it doing things a rotor really shouldn't be doing. Customer states, buddy helped me get the 4-wheel drive sorted last weekend. Drives a little different now, but I figured it just needed to break in. Customer states, parking brake got stuck, so I improvised a little. She still stops fine though. And this is exactly how you know that the last time someone popped the hood was probably when all members of Lynyrd Skynyrd were still alive. The owner of this car had been on his way to pick up his daughter from soccer practice when he heard a loud crack and suddenly couldn't steer. The strut had let go and caused some serious damage to the wheel. This mechanic was just doing a routine oil change when a pretty interesting shade of green came pouring out of the drain hole. This car came in for an oil change when the mechanic got underneath and found the drive shaft having the time of its life dancing around down there. The owner of this car had apparently handed a brake problem over to his cousin, who was apparently pretty handy with cars. The mechanic got underneath the car and found the brake lines looking like this. This car had been running on what the owner described as premium grade engine oil ever since he bought it 3 years ago, and this is what was left of it. And sometimes, the other shop actually does a decent job for once. Customer states, just had the whole rear wiring harness redone by a guy from my church group. He even prayed for me after he was done and told me that the light shall now be with me. This mechanic got underneath this one expecting a quick inspection, but instead found a rust museum with its very own big red soda fountain. This customer rolled in saying that his car has started to feel a bit wonky lately, but he always washes it once a week and it doesn't have any surface rust whatsoever. This engine oil had apparently decided it wanted to be fudge when it grew up. Customer rolled in saying that his car idles a little rough, but once you get it going, it smoothens out. Customer came in saying, "Yeah, I brought the lawnmower in too. Figured you could change the oil on both while you're anyways at it." Customer states, "It's sometimes hard to get it out of gear. Could it be the selector cable that's going?" And this Jeep had apparently been in the hands of someone who believed that close enough is good enough, because the transmission looked like this when the mechanic got underneath it. The owner of this car had been on his way home from a summer road trip when he noticed the front end of the car smelled a little strange. The mechanic put it up on the lift and found the front spoiler and headlight surrounds had partially melted off the car. The customer had been complaining about a damp smell in the car for a few weeks, and once the mechanic pulled up the back seat, it became pretty clear where the smell was coming from. And this is exactly what it looks like when your alternator belt decides it's only going to work part-time. The owner of this car came in saying he'd heard a bang from underneath and then the car had started driving strangely. Turns out the drive shaft had come loose, picked a fight at everything nearby, and had spun out oil absolutely everywhere. And even though you can find all kinds of things for your car on Temu, sometimes it's just better that you save your money. Customer states, "Car's been running a little warm lately, but I've been topping up the coolant every week or so, and that used to work, but not anymore." Customer states, "Just had a side exhaust put on and it sounds amazing. There's just a tiny bit of smoke on startup. Is that normal?" The owner of this Fiat had apparently lost his keys at some point and needed a quick solution because he needed to get to work on time. So he went with a screwdriver and a little bit of electrical tape. Hey, if it works, I guess. And this is exactly why you don't ignore a small puddle in the driveway for 6 months. The owner of this car rolled in because he said he only needed a tire rotation because he was going on a longer road trip soon. When the mechanics told him to think twice about driving a car like that longer distances, the customer just rolled away. This car rolled in with a pretty nasty clunking sound from the front end, and the mechanic pulled the old control arm to show the customer exactly why. The ball joint had definitely seen better days. Customer states, "I keep getting this strange, stingy smell when I park. Could it just be the car cooling down after a long drive?" The mechanic working on this one didn't quite know where to start. No front spoiler, a pretty beat up rim, and loose wires hanging everywhere in the engine bay. Someone had been very busy, and not in a good way. The owner of this Ford Fusion had been on his way to his buddy's place to watch the game, but when he got there, he couldn't turn the car off. Customer states, "There's a slight burnt plastic smell from the engine bay sometimes, but I think it's just normal when it gets hot outside." "Hey man, if it works for you, it's all good." The mechanic working on this one found the dashboard covered in healing crystals and a purple shag rug on the driver's side floor. He later said it was the most spiritually prepared car he'd ever diagnosed. And this customer came in saying they've noticed that their steering has started to feel kind of sticky in certain spots, like something's catching. I wonder what it might be. Customer states, "Ran it a little hot on the highway last week, but I let it cool down and she fired right back up later the same day. Probably nothing serious, right?" The owner of this Hyundai had been driving on what he described as pretty okay tires, and had only come in because his brother kept telling him to get new ones. Let's just say the customer is very lucky to have a brother that has more than 2 brain cells. Customer states, "Just got the wheel bearings done at a shop down the road. They said they used the special grade stuff, but is it normal for it to sound like that?" This car came in after the owner said all the electrics had suddenly cut out while driving on the highway. The alternator belt was sitting in pieces in the engine bay, the alternator pulley had snapped clean off, and the alternator itself had decided it was time for retirement. And the owner of this car rolled in saying that his car is really sensitive on the gas and wanted it checked out. And the oil pan on this one was doing its best impression of a disco ball.